Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. Let's talk about the job scenario, both global and Indian, in the context of the coming winter or a bleak outlook for the global economy. Given the developments that have hogged the headlines over the past few months, it may be apt to talk about the topic under the following heads. Layoffs announced by companies in the US. Why the US? The rest of the world sneezes if the world's largest economy catches a cold. Layoffs announced in India in the context of startups. The fortunes of the Indian IT services industry, and a quick look at the most recent financial metrics announced. Job additions by the US economy that could serve as a signal to Indian exporters. And in the realm of conjecture, what could have happened behind the scenes in the Indian IT service industry when the 2008 financial crisis hit us. Manpower layoffs that have been announced in the US just over 2 months, September-October, crossed 60,000 according to global outplacement and coaching firm Challenger Gray and Christmas Inc. October alone at 33,843 clocked the highest for a single month since February 2021 when we were at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. A recent Reuters report listed out companies that have announced either a cut or intend to cut headcount in the US. Here's a sample. Amazon, which talked about 10,000 jobs, Meta or Facebook, that referred to 11,000 jobs that might be on the block, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, Lyft, Warner Brothers, Seagate Tech, Philips, and Twitter. And why are layoff announcements becoming more common? Google parent Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai has talked about the coming winter for the global economy. In an all-hands meeting earlier this year in September, one of his responses to a staff query on budget cuts was that we don't get to choose the macroeconomic conditions all the time. There is a distinct possibility of a global economic recession brewing. And why do we think that is so? With inflation rates zooming in most parts of the world, central banks around the globe have been scrambling since March this year to rein it in by increasing lending rates. That is, they make it more costly to borrow, make, and consume. The flip side is this would eventually impact economic growth and hence jobs. Economic growth forecasts for 2022 and 2023 by the International Monetary Fund or the IMF are gloomy, considering that we are just emerging from the pandemic and given the ongoing European war. If you set apart 2008, the year that the financial crisis hit the world, the IMF's estimates for 2022 and 2023 are the weakest since 2001. What do US CEOs feel about the coming months? The periodic conference board measure of CEO confidence has shown that CEOs in the West haven't been this downbeat since the 2007-2009 recession. The survey asked 136 CEOs what economic conditions they were preparing to face over the next 12 to 18 months. An overwhelming majority, 98%, said they were preparing for a US recession, while 99% said they were preparing for an EU recession. Let's pan our focus to India, the Indian corporate sector, and see how the Indian IT services sector is doing. And why Indian IT services sector? Because it depends on the West for a significant portion of its fortune. It's also among the largest employers in the organized sector, and any indication of job additions or job cuts is indicative of what's in store for the economy. Plus, for every additional job that the sector creates, there is a trickle-down effect, meaning an additional 2 to 3 jobs are created in other parts of the economy. Other than layoffs announced by the sector following discovery of moonlighting by staff, no significant churn has been seen there. We also looked at the July-August-September quarter financial metrics for IT services companies. There again, all top companies have reported a rise in revenue and net profit, save for Wipro, which reported a 9% slide in net profit compared with a year earlier. There again, one swallow does not a summer make. So we then looked at a couple of other metrics. First, at attrition rates, or the number of employees per 100 quitting on their own. The second metric we looked at was the operating profit margins. We just took 2 top companies just as a sample, TCS and Infosys. It's evident from the table that attrition is still high, at around 27% for Infosys for the July-August 2022 quarter. The immediately preceding quarter was slightly higher, but it's in the same ballpark. Likewise for TCS, which is in the 20 to 21% range. So attrition being high can only mean that there is enough business for the sector for competitors to draw away employees with promise of higher salaries. Media reports have us know that Infosys aims to pay about 65% of variable pay to employees for the July-September quarter. This compares with about 70% in the immediately previous quarter, ostensibly because the company acknowledges that there is pressure on margins. The Bureau of Labor Statistics of the US tells us that even though the corporate America has announced layoffs, there are also sections of that economy which have added jobs. For October, the data shows that healthcare industry saw the healthiest additions, pun intended, at 53,000 new jobs. Manufacturing followed with another robust 32,000. The cause for concern was in retail because the US goes into holiday shopping mode now, pre-Christmas, and the retail sector saw an addition of a very weak 7,200 odd jobs. These pieces of data could interest Indian IT firms. Indian IT services industry earns roughly about 1/3 of its revenue from financial services, and a big chunk of that comes from North America. The BLS data that we just cited before says that this particular sector, the financial services sector, has seen little change in terms of job additions over the past 6 months. The list of layoffs that we read out earlier in this conversation came predominantly from the tech sector, but not so much from financial services. News of layoffs in Indian corporates has been predominantly in the startup space, specifically in the educational technology front. Drying up of funding from investors has been cited as one reason. The Indian startup layoff tracker by Inc42 showed more than 15,700 employees had been laid off in 2022, given tightening funding conditions. The names that the report cites include Byju's, ChargeBee, Cars24, Ola, Unacademy, and Vedantu. The tracker also showed that the edtech sector has laid off the most, 14 startups laying off 6,900 employees in 2022, and the year isn't over yet. We have looked at some facts and some data, but let's take a small detour and look at something more subjective. Our own perception of job vulnerability plays a key role in a feeling of well-being, and where you work out of could determine your perceptions. For instance, the LinkedIn Workforce Confidence Survey drew on the responses of more than 14,500 professionals in the US between September 10 and November 4th and showed that those working from remote locations, that is, work from home or work from anywhere rather than office, a good chunk of them feared budget cuts from employers. Data from the accompanying graphic shows that 35% of workers who work from remote locations were concerned about changes in employer budgets, while only 28% of those working on-site, that is, in the office, were similarly concerned. If you're someone who spent long years in the Indian IT services industry, you've probably seen several slowdowns and recessions, and you have an understanding of how these impact companies. But if you're much younger and have spent, say, less than 5 years, then there may be some lessons to take away from past slowdowns and recessions. 2008, for example, when that recession, global recession, hit the Indian IT service industry, here are a few things that could have happened behind the scenes. When the going is good, IT companies find it easy to package somebody who is even average on the performance scale as part of a large, say, 50-member team and present the whole batch to a client. But when the going gets tough and the economic environment is unforgiving, then every additional resource in every project gets a hard look at by the client and by the firm. When the economic environment slows down, companies tend to adopt two different approaches in deciding who can stay on their roles. One is, of course, the performance appraisal system that we've discussed. And second is determining whether an individual has spent a significant amount of time on bench, that is, without projects. So I've seen instances where more than 1 month on the bench and you'd get an automated email from HR saying, sign up for these training programs. And more than 3 months on the bench, then the system decides you do not belong there. These are, of course, just examples, and not that every company follows this approach. If something similar were to happen now, as it did in the aftermath of the 2008 recession that stretched well beyond just 2 to 3 years beyond that point, firms would begin slowing down net headcount addition. The one place that they would look at in terms of lowering intake would be from planned additions from campuses. Offers may be made, but absorption into the company could well take 9 to 12 months from the time of offer. So, if you're a fresher on campus in a college and have an offer from a company that can take you in immediately, you might choose that over a better-known firm that gives you an offer letter but no fixed date on which it would absorb you. A bird in hand is worth two in the bush. If you thought that the whole picture looks gloomy, negative, and pessimistic, here's something you can take a lot of consolation from. Mr. S. Gopalakrishnan, co-founder of Infosys, is emphatic that the technology sector is resilient. He says the march of technology is on, and he's also confident that the sector would add a net of 2 lakh jobs in the near future. He says there's always demand for skills in data sciences, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, just to name a few. That's it for now from us. Till the next episode of Business Matters, it's goodbye and have a lovely week ahead.